continue today have been lost in I called it a mad and pretentious rush to be cool and fashionable. And at the time I said, and I quote, "At a time when we witnessed the most appalling atrocities in East Timor, this is 17 years ago, may we dismiss with the brevity it deserves the notion that the monarchy means that we're under British control." I said it was the Governor-General who signed the proclamation authorising the deployment of our armed forces in East Timor and remains in nominal command of those forces. I said Her Majesty the Queen most probably heard the news on the radio or read it in the Evening Standard, the same as everybody else in Europe. And I made the point then, and I make it again, the Queen does not command our armed forces, even though she commands our respect. But the persistence, I said, with which the claims are made that a constitutional monarchy renders us subservient to the British is as fanciful as it is intellectually dishonest. I made the point that the Queen has only one power in Australia, and that is the power to appoint and dismiss the Governor-General, and that power to be exercised only at the request of the Australian Prime Minister. I made the point then that Malcolm Mackerras had said that the expression, quote, "head of state," is a political science term which appears nowhere in the Australian Constitution. And as he argued, a common sense view would be that the head of state is the person who does the job of the head of state, and that person is the Governor-General. The Queen does not give assent to bills, the Governor-General does that. And I quoted Sir Harry Gibbs at the time, who made the point that Republican constitutions throughout the world differ widely in detail. In the United States, the President has full executive power and is not responsible to the legislature for the exercise of that power. In Ireland or in Germany, the President exercises little more than ceremonial functions. The assumption that if Australia were to become a republic, Australians would want to see the President placed in a position similar to that occupied by the Governor-General is a matter for some debate. But what they seem to be suggesting is the President would have some or all of the powers which are now exercised by the Governor-General. And amongst those powers commonly are known the powers to dissolve the House of Representatives and to appoint and dismiss Ministers of State. But Sir Harry Gibbs said that if those powers were to be conferred on a President without qualification, the President would be in the position of a dictator, proroguing the Parliament, dissolving the House of Representatives, dismissing ministers, whereas the exercise of the powers conferred on the Governor-General by the Constitution are controlled by convention. And the conventions, I said then, are so strong, based on our previous history, that it would be unthinkable of the Governor-General to exercise the powers of his office except in accordance with the advice of his ministers. And the former Chief Justice acknowledged that in certain circumstances the Governor-General may make decisions for himself. Yes, he may dismiss a Prime Minister, and he may dissolve the House of Representatives, and he may refuse to dissolve the House of Representatives against the advice of the Prime Minister, but those are called, as I said, reserve powers. And those powers are constrained by convention, which are not rules of law. So if the powers presently vested in the Governor-General were conferred on a President and no provision was made for the application of the constitutional conventions, where would we be? One of the extraordinary aspects of this whole Republican case, which continues, is that when push turns to shove, we're told nothing. We're being asked to take on trust the argument that a President will somehow know what to do, even though the job itself has no description. And what irritated the Republican people at the time, including the incumbent Prime Minister, was when I said, well, all right, I'm telling those who listen to me, if they don't know what the powers are, vote no. And that's what they did. If you don't know, vote no. We still don't know. And we actually have no indication from the other crowd what it is they are seeking in terms of conferring upon such a person. Should the President, for example, be born here? No answer. Should the President have been a resident for a specified period? No answer. Should the President be above or below a certain age? No answer. should members of Parliament be ineligible for appointment for a certain period, such as 5 years after they retire from the Parliament, just in case someone's looking to give his mate a job? No answer. None of those questions are addressed. And I said, if the President is to be appointed by the Parliament, which I said at the time I can guarantee you the public won't wear, Bill Hayden provides us with the appropriate and public reaction, quote, "When politicians say trust us, that's when your blood runs cold." But as I said, if the President is to be chosen by popular vote, such a person would have a mandate greater than that of the Prime Minister. As I said, then along with many other unaddressed and unanswered questions is the simple one. What happens to the states? The monarchical character of the Commonwealth is established by the Commonwealth of Australia Act. That's the Commonwealth. But the monarchical character of the states is established by the Australia Act. So, the people of the Australian colonies way back agreed to unite in what was called an indissoluble federal Commonwealth under the Crown. So we're now being told, we continue to be told, that that which was solemnly declared to be indissoluble should not be dissolved without the consent of all the parties to the original compact, that is, the states. If so, there'd have to be a new kind of union, like a republic, and the dissent of one state should cause the proposals to fail. Not one sentence has been uttered to address the issue of the states. So I quoted then Sir Harry Gibbs, who said, since Australia should not change to a republic unless a referendum is carried in all states, and since if the change is to be made, all state constitutions and the Commonwealth Constitution should be amended at the same time, it follows that if a Commonwealth-wide referendum is held, then there should be held simultaneously in each state a referendum to seek a corresponding approval to the amendment of the state constitution. So, when you look at all of that, what are we being asked? Whether we favour a republic. It is, of course, in the republics, in those advocates, it's in their interest to pretend no problems exist, that it is to prosper a constitutional and political untruth to argue that there aren't problems and they can't articulate, identify or resolve them. So there is more to all of this, and that's why we meet here, and that's why it's absolutely you stick firmly to the task. There's more to all this than slogans and platitudinous nonsense. Robert Ellicott, the former Federal Attorney General, gave a speech on this very same subject at about the same time. And that text appears in the volume that we launched on that day. But Robert Ellicott argued that the referendum proposal must be voted down, and he went on, the coming referendum proposal is not a simple choice between republic or no republic. It is, as you may have already realised, much more complex and much more deceptive than that. He said, Australians need not be apologetic or ashamed of their system of government. We're in the vanguard of the world's great democracies. Our island continent and what its institutions offer and deliver are the envy of the world. He said we are independent, free and sovereign people, living under the rule of law, governed by unchallenged democratic institutions. He said we have been for decades. The roots, he said, of Australian nationalism go well back into the 19th century. Poets, painters, publicists and politicians echoed the call, he said. He went on. We've nurtured a healthy attitude to independence. Federation, he said, was a massive popular expression of it. Current statements that we're still tugging the forelock or licking the boots of Whitehall or polishing the English crown are nothing but an aphorism of addled and deceptive minds. Wrote Robert Ellicott, that other nations think less of us because the Queen of Australia is not Australian is arrant nonsense. He said, such statements are designed to make Australians feel that our country's institutions are cringing and inferior and need to be changed. He said Australians won't fall for that. We have marched, as Henry Lawson put it, till the world has grown wide. And he said the world understands that. He argued, why, when you enjoy full sovereignty, independence and freedom under a democratic institution, why would a majority of Australians ask this must, or why shouldn't we change it? Well, see, Bob Ellicott may not be used to the last word I said at the time, the sentiments are mine and yours, and they belong to the majority of Australians. They are sentiments at the time that were magnificently articulated by the man I have flown from Melbourne to introduce, and my apologies because I've got to leave almost immediately and get back there because I've got a gig on tonight, and that is Australia's most unpopular ever Prime Minister. So unpopular that he won 25 seats from the Labor Party in 2 elections, unprecedented in the history of Australian politics. It has to be said slowly. Melbourne Cup time, as I said to David Flynn, Melbourne Cup time. So all these people will go tomorrow to the Melbourne Cup, and in their hand they have a newspaper, or what's commonly called in racing a form guide. And they look up the form guide, and they see a horse that hasn't won a race, they're not likely to back it. If the horse had won 25 races, they'd think this might be worth a few bob on this, it's got to be a big chance. Well, if you look at the form guide, we're in the presence of arguably the most outstanding political leader in terms of results. And remember, we rightly idealise Sir Robert Menzies, and that's true. But those of us old enough to understand know that in the early 1950s the Labor Party split, and there was a very significant schism, and that formed itself into the Democratic Labor Party, which would never, pledged itself never, ever, ever to vote for the Labor Party as such, because they were opposed to communist infiltration, the union movement and so on. So, in a way, that block of people who pre-1955 were Labor people voted and gave their preferences to Menzies. Now, Howard didn't have the benefit of any of that, nor did Abbott in 2 elections. And yet he dragged over 1 million votes from the other side and plonked them into the coalition, given that he inherited a Liberal Party in disarray. He took 8 seats first time, and 7 seats first time, and 18 seats the second time. And so unpopular when you send this bloke into any gathering here in Australia today, apart from the cafe latte set over here. They just love to talk to him because he's a normal, ordinary person. I embarrass him every time, and I couldn't care less, and I'm about to embarrass him now. This is one of the finest men I've ever met, and I've been a lot. And I'm not the Lone Ranger, because, of course, the rest of the world wants to hear from him. This is the man who articulated clearly, and before anyone else, this whole terrorist threat, who kept on saying, you don't have to beat them, you have to destroy them. And indeed, conservative forces across the world, whether they're in Britain or in Europe, have asked him to talk to them. How on earth did you deal with this refugee issue? They ask him. Sad, isn't it, that people are more appreciated sometimes outside their country than they are within. I think occasions like this are important for Tony Abbott to be told how grateful we are for what he has done in this country. How grateful we are for the kind of person who is always himself. Always himself. Did he make mistakes? Of course he made mistakes. Does he make them? Of course he does. I mean, we're not talking about Teresa's here. But at the end of the day, in a very difficult environment, we now look back and see that they're now preaching about the welfare mess, aren't they? And they're saying, well, health costs running out of control. Yeah, well, where were all this lot when you just wanted a little co-payment of $7? Oh, no, we couldn't have it because it was an Abbott policy. So, Tony, I have flown from Melbourne for one reason, to be able to say these things, and I say them wherever I go around the country. You've got a tremendous record, amazing. How you did all that, I've no idea. In 2 elections, 25 seats is unbelievable, and it's a story. The form guide is second to none. And of course, on this case, he's led that in a clear, concise, simply articulated way. We're in your debt. We love you for what you do. We're glad that you're continuing to do it. Glad that you're continuing to do it.